Today we are tackling a particularly sensitive and really challenging topic, the criminal investigation into the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas. Our goal here is to analyze the sources as neutrally as we can, focusing on the facts. Specifically, the facts around the discovery of her remains and, well, the really complex forensic puzzle that investigators are facing.
And it is a deeply difficult case for everyone involved. And that difficulty, it really starts with the physical evidence itself. The sources describing the discovery back in September, they noted right away that the remains were severely decomposed.
Right.
And that presents an immediate, just a massive challenge to establishing any kind of clear timeline.
And that's what makes this so different, isn't it? What
Yeah.
puts everyone in such a unique spot is this central, kind of shocking detail that sources are reporting. This theory that Rivas' remains were somehow subjected to extreme cold, like either frozen or significantly refrigerated before they were put in the car where they were found.
That theory is really the gravitational center of this whole investigation. It's everything. If it's confirmed, it doesn't just, add a complicating factor. It scrambles the entire timeline of death. It forces law enforcement to use totally different methods to try and reconstruct what happened.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the beginning with the discovery. What are the sources telling us about the hard facts of September 8th?
So on September 8th, Rivas's remains were found. They were in the trunk of a Tesla. And that vehicle belonged to David Anthony Burke, who is the 20-year-old platinum-selling musician known as D4V.
And crucially, the discovery wasn't made by police tracking the car or anything like that.
No, not at all.
The vehicle was found at a tow yard in Hollywood. And it was the staff there who reported it. They said it was, and this is a quote, emanating a foul odor and attracting flies.
And that description alone, it just gives you a very vivid picture of the state of decomposition, regardless of any potential freezing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also essential to provide context on the victim here. Celeste Rivas. She would have turned 15 the day before this discovery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we also know from flyers that her family had circulated that she'd been reported missing on multiple occasions throughout 2024. So that suggests, a pattern of concern leading up to her death.
And there's also the alleged personal connection. Rivas's mother reportedly told TMZ that her daughter had a boyfriend named David. And since then, various photos, videos, things that supposedly show Rivas and Burke together have been all over social media.
Right, and that alleged link is combined with a very important geographical one. The Tesla, it wasn't just found anywhere. It was towed from the Bird Streets, which is a very affluent area in the Hollywood Hills.
Oh.
And neighbors there told Rolling Stone the car had been seen in different spots around that neighborhood since May. And this is key, it had been sitting in the exact spot it was towed from for at least 3 weeks.
3 weeks, just sitting there. And that gives us a really critical window of time where the body was either decomposing or thawing inside that car.
Absolutely. And law enforcement immediately jumped on that geography. After the discovery, after Rivas was identified, they searched a house just around the block from where the car was towed, on a street called Dahini Place. The property owner confirmed it was rented to Burke's manager, Josh Marshall, starting back in February.
That proximity is huge. The car was parked, static, for weeks, just steps away from a property rented by the suspect's manager. It connects everything, the car, the suspect circle, the discovery, to this very small specific area.
It really strengthens that local connection. It shows this wasn't some random placement of the vehicle. It establishes a whole nexus of activity right there in that neighborhood.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's drill down on the key forensic puzzle here. We've talked about severe decomposition, but now we're talking about freezing. How can both of those things be true? What do the sources say about this so-called refrigeration theory?
Well, sources, mainly Rolling Stone, are reporting that investigators are actively exploring this possibility, that the remains were either frozen or refrigerated before being wrapped in a bag and put in the trunk. And that is such a stunning detail because it implies a very deliberate action.
An action to conceal the timeline.
Exactly. It seems like a direct attempt to interfere with the only objective evidence they have, the body itself. In fact, this puzzle is so complex that outside experts have been brought in to consult on it before the final autopsy is even released.
And when they do that, when they call in external consultants, that tells you that the medical examiner's office knows they're dealing with something way outside the norm. So let's talk about the specific forensic impact, because this is really the core of it. If the body was frozen, how does that change how investigators determine the post-mortem interval, the PMI, the time since death?
Right. So PMI estimation relies on a predictable series of changes that happen after death. Things like rigor mortis, body cooling, and especially insect activity, forensic entomology. It's one of the most reliable methods for long-term PMI.
So if a body is left out, insects arrive pretty quickly, they lay eggs, and you can track the life cycle of those bugs to figure out a time of death.
Precisely. You look at the life cycle stage of the oldest insects on the remains, and you can work backwards to establish a minimum time since death. However, refrigeration or freezing, it just completely halts that clock. It's like pressing pause.
So the insects stop developing, the bacteria stops working,
Yeah,
everything is just suspended.
everything is suspended. So if the body was frozen for, say, 3 months, and then it thawed in the trunk of that hot car for 3 weeks, the forensic scientist might only see evidence of 3 weeks of active decomposition.
Even though the person actually died 3 months ago.
Exactly. The timeline is completely fractured. The biological evidence only shows you the time spent after the deep freeze. You lose all those reliable initial markers. And the reports from TMZ, they had some really graphic details that reinforce this. They reported the body had been partially frozen and was thawing, and that Rivas's head was severed and her limbs were cut into multiple pieces.
And those details, as grim as they really provide context for the extreme challenge here. It suggests not just decomposition, but an intentional alteration of the remains.
If the remains were altered and frozen, it achieves two things for whoever is responsible. It makes identification harder, sure, but more importantly, it makes dating the death almost impossible. And when you combine those factors, it leads right to what the sources are predicting for the official ruling,
Which is,
that the cause of death will most likely be undetermined.
wow, that's a huge finding for any legal case. If the cause of death, or even just the reliable time of death, is undetermined, that makes the prosecution's job incredibly difficult.
It really does. Without a firm date of death, how do you build a concrete timeline? How do you connect a suspect who might have an alibi for certain dates to the specific moment of the crime? You can't. And this uncertainty is exactly why the investigation is having to lean so heavily on other things like the car's movements and digital evidence instead of the biological evidence they'd normally rely on.
So let's transition to David Anthony Burke, the owner of the Tesla. What's his current status?
Burke, the 20-year-old singer, has not been charged with any crime. That is a crucial distinction to make. However, sources at NBC News and ABC7 have reported that he is now considered a suspect in Rivas's death.
And at the time the remains were actually found, on September 8th, he was out of state on a national concert tour.
He was. The timeline is striking. He actually performed a show in Minneapolis the day after the remains were found. So he was continuing with his tour commitments while his car was at the center of a homicide investigation back in Hollywood.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the professional consequences for him were immediate and they were severe, even without any official charges.
The fallout was incredibly rapid. The rest of his tour was canceled very, very quickly. But maybe more telling were the actions of his corporate partners.
Right. Tell us more about that.
Two major brands, Crocs and Hollister, they completely pulled a marketing campaign that featured him. It was a big collaboration. And in the entertainment world, brands dropping a platinum-selling artist like that so quickly, it just signals a complete withdrawal of confidence. It was based purely on the reported connection and the horrific nature of these details.
The details of the refrigeration theory and the state of the remains were just enough to cause a corporate panic.
It created a totally untenable situation for them. And we should also reiterate, Burke has been silent. He hasn't commented publicly at all, and his lawyer hasn't responded to multiple requests for comment. So the investigation is still very dynamic. It's in this weird legal gray area where a suspect is publicly identified, but the core forensic evidence, the timeline of death, is, well, it's being actively undermined by the nature of the crime itself.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? We've mapped out the geography, tying that towed car directly to Burke's management. We've established the reported connection between Rivas and Burke.
And most critically, we've analyzed the central role this refrigeration theory plays. That detail is the master key. It's the reason investigators are grappling with an undetermined cause and time of death. And that uncertainty has huge implications for how this case can even proceed.
You now have the crucial details, the forensic challenges, and the legal and public context around this incredibly complex investigation.
This raises an important question. When you have severe decomposition combined with an intentional attempt to suspend the timeline, like freezing, Our legal system's reliance on precise biological evidence for justice, it sort of breaks down. If a timeline can't be scientifically proven, how much weight do investigators then have to place on circumstantial evidence? Things like the car's location, digital records, personal associations. The difficulty of overcoming that kind of intentional forensic sabotage, it remains one of the greatest barriers to justice in cases just like this.